Hello, my name is Amena Jamali, and this is my presentation for Right Hive 2025, Disaster Recovery as an Author. So you might be wondering what that is, but before we get into it, let me kind of explain a little bit about who I am and why I am presenting all of this to you. So Amena Jamali, I am the author of the Lord of Freedom series, Epic Noble Bright Fantasy. I have uh, 6 books published under my own name, one trad published book in cybersecurity, and then one anthology that I'm a part of. The part of my qualifications that's most relevant to this presentation is that I'm a cybersecurity auditor going on for 4+ years of experience, and I particularly work with companies in advising them about their security controls, and that includes disaster recovery. To kind of explain why I'm talking about this, disaster recovery is the idea that we need to prepare for disasters, like losing all of our data, losing the digital and physical assets that are important to our organization or, us individuals as authors. The reason I came up with the idea that this very corporate, very business oriented, a sort of a stereotypical corporate America, um, I guess you could even say capitalist idea. The reason I realize that this really applies to us as authors is the problem. Okay, so the problem that I see is that contrary to how these things are usually discussed in author communities, in many senses, everything that's online doesn't really belong to us. So I see a lot of advice that, hey, social media doesn't really belong to you. It's not really your platform. So instead you should have a newsletter and a website. The trouble is that that too does not really belong to us as individuals, as individual businesses. Since the idea of a newsletter is that like the setup behind the technology of it is that there's this company that has a bunch of servers sitting in probably a data center that it hosts certain protocols on, and using those protocols, it's able to send a number of emails. We don't own the server, we don't own the website, the user interface that we use to access our account on that server. We don't we're not the ones that actually handle the protocols to send the emails. And similarly for websites, we have maybe a domain that we own, but the actual website is hosted. It has to it requires a physical presence. It's one of those realities of technology that people tend to ignore in the modern world, that everything actually still has a physical presence underneath it all. So a website is um, it's like a collection of code that is hosted on a server sitting somewhere. Unless and that's like a really reductionistic explanation. But the point is that unless you have the server in your own living room, your own office room, your own basement, and you're providing all of its electricity and you're handling all the protocols and the internet connection, you don't really own it. And that kind of brings us to the idea, and that brings us in part to the idea of disaster recovery. Another really big component of this is that, and I say this as a technologist that looks at other companies' information systems, the ones that they develop, the ones that they sell to their own customers, and that is very simply that both sophisticated technology and simple technology fail often. It's not really necessarily about the competence of the team building it. It's not about the care involved. It's just simply that things break, and we don't always understand why. No matter how much thought went into it, or didn't go into it, or how much security was put around it, or wasn't put around it, things just fail often and break. And I know that this is especially true because even if you think about it, the idea of a journal, so physical journal, right? Still, it does in a sense sometimes fail. Like, you spill a glass of water on it and you lose everything in it. Well, the same idea does apply to a laptop. You can also spill a glass of water on that and lose everything in that too. The summary is that it's very easy to lose critical data, and none of us really want to be in that position where you lose your entire manuscript in the middle of writing it. That would be awful. The idea of disaster recovery. So I've taken my understanding of this corporate process, of the advice I've given to clients over the last few years, and kind of sort of simplified it into three different pieces for us to discuss during this presentation. So the first is a business impact analysis, the second is a disaster recovery plan, and the third is some practical things to think about while putting the first two into play. You will notice that there is an emphasis here about documentation. That is because I am an auditor and I am of the belief that important things ought to be written down in order to preserve them for your future self's sake, and just in case you ever need to pass on the information to someone else in order to do it for you, speaking in what I imagine an author would need. So these are the three basic steps that I'm going to discuss in this presentation. First, business impact analysis. This is this corporate practice for basically writing down everything that is important and giving it a rating about how important it is. In the corporate setting, I would be thinking about obviously servers, but also like laptops, the different kinds of data that are on those devices. As an as an author, I'm thinking about my works in progress. So my current drafts of the books that I'm currently writing, my published files. So those PDFs, EPUBs that are the result of you preparing everything for publication. I would also be thinking about my newsletter subscriber list, my covers and my character art. I mean, the original digital copies that I keep on my desktop and in my cloud drives. Marketing graphics and captions, those are actually important. They're sometimes even in the sense of, definitely in the sense of like sometimes you talk about something online that you need to later refer back to for your books, but also they are a digital asset. Just think about how much work it takes to develop a graphic in an app like Canva. Think about what would happen if you needed to reuse it and then it wasn't there and you had to actually make it again, all over again. So they are also digital assets. And then also things like accounting and tax documents. So the spreadsheets where you might be writing down how much you spent on certain things, how much money you made from your books, any tax documents, so tax returns, tax filings. I also kind of include in here the 1099s that Amazon sends and Amazon and other publishing platforms send. Hopefully this is not a mystery to anyone who's listening to what I'm saying. And then, just miscellaneous notes. So as a plotter, I have a lot of notes that I consider absolutely critical. And I'm always thinking about what would happen if I lost them and then wasn't able to refer back to them. So this is kind of my list of what I deem important. Everyone has their own list. And part of this discussion of business impact analysis is that you really ought to have your own list and it really ought to be written down. You should know what is important to you. You should know what you couldn't do without, what you would have to spend hours, if not days, if not weeks, if not months recreating if you lost it. You really do. You really should know. And you should know how important each piece is in relation to the other pieces. So, for example, I would say that my works in progress are probably the most important piece because there's creativity at play that if I lost something in it, it would be absolutely devastating. It's also not as easily backed up as, say, my published files. That's why they're kind of in par in importance, but the works in progress are more critical because the published files, they'll at least be backed up in the place that I uploaded them to. But they're also very critical. What would I do if I lost my actual base copy of the PDF that I upload for paperbacks or the EPUB that I upload for ebooks? Like, does it even bear thinking about? Kind of the thing is that you need to think about it. Then other things like covers and character art, I personally I find that if I didn't think about it, I could very easily lose track of which is the final file, and where all the different pieces went across my um, across my phone, my phone camera roll, my different laptops, my cloud drives. So anyway, in summary, keep a list and know how important each piece is to you. Um, and based on that, you can take this next step. The next step, disaster recovery plan. In the corporate sense, we talk about two different areas here: the recovery point objective, the recovery time objective. And I've very much simplified it for this discussion. So the recovery point objective, the maximum data that you can afford to lose. And the recovery time objective, the maximum time that you can afford to be in recovery mode. In the corporate setting, this often turns out to be that, like, measured in a number of hours or days, and the idea is to keep both as minimum as possible, keep them the smallest numbers possible. I would say that as authors, I put this consideration before you. You can afford not be able to be in a position that you I'm just, in a general sense, you may be able to afford not being in a position where you can write or publish for a while. If it takes time for you to recover your files, you may be able to afford to spend that time. But we as authors, we really can't afford to lose data, because, and this is where it's very different from what I would say as a cybersecurity auditor, that the data that we might lose here, it's literally pieces of our souls. And we cannot afford to lose it. We can't afford to be in a position where, you know, you lost half the chapter that you were writing. If it was a corporate entity, I mean, they lost like a day's worth of data being produced by their applications. I mean, they might be able to write that loss off. Would you be able to write that loss off though? If you lost, say, 1,000 words of your last draft, that was 1,000 words that it took so much thinking and creativity in order to write, would you be able to afford losing that? If your answer to that is no, I could not afford to lose it, like it would be devastating to me to even lose 1,000 words, then you're kind of on the same page as me as to why a disaster recovery plan is necessary. What's actually in a disaster recovery plan? So this is where I'm going to discuss in a probably sort of a high level view, but hopefully in a way that you can implement it. So the first thing that you need to discuss, that you need to think about as part of your disaster recovery plan and as part of your implementation, is how you're going to back things up. Because that is, of course, the fundamental idea of a disaster recovery plan, that you have backed things up. But more than simply, oh, I backed it up. Like I made a copy. Okay, but where did you make a copy to? How much did you include that in that copy? How often did you make that copy? The idea of disaster recovery is to be systematic in this. And it's when you're doing it on per the cadence, which I'm going to discuss in a minute. If you're doing it kind of while you're doing it, it seems like, oh, it's just another task I have to do. I have kind of seen that in the companies that I audit, that just another task. I mean, does it really matter how much we monitor it? But usually people figure out how important these things are when a disaster strikes, because one does strike. It's you can't really afford to think that it's never going to happen to you. You really should be preparing for the scenario where you spill a cup of water all over your laptop or something, or your laptop dies and you lose everything, or something even bigger than that happens. So coming back to backup methods. So this is where I say that you should have at least two separate backups for everything you rate critical. So such as those published documents and new works in progress. Why two? The what I often say is what I often see and what I often advise in corporate spaces is you should have a backup region, or a backup server, a backup site, something like that. Going back to the beginning, we don't really own the places that we're backing things up to. And what if one of them fails? You know, If you're kind of reading to the rest of the slide, you're probably wondering, hey, do these places really fail? Let me answer that technology fails. It doesn't matter who owns it, it does fail. Uh, there are certain things that we discuss in the auditing space about how even the likes of Amazon Web Services, there are certain practices that we recommend implementing beyond what Amazon itself advises because of how the regions, for example, the places where their data centers are, they're um, sometimes so close that if a disaster strikes, um, you know, the, it may not be a problem that they're emphasizing, but you definitely need to think about, because at the end of the day, the data is ours and not that company's. So they may give guarantees about how much they will ensure that data remains available, but it's ours. So we need to be the ones that think more about it than anyone else. So where can you back up your files to? Going back to that. So the first is, of course, external hard drives. I have an external hard drive that I try to remember to back my data up to. Um, but you should also have a backup place on the cloud. So I've listed a few here that I use or have considered using. So the obvious is Google Drive. I've included a snapshot of my Google Drive. And let me also, I don't think I can flip browser. Okay, I can flip browser tabs and sort of just show you very quickly. So here's my Google Drive. There is the usual amount of storage you get with a free Google account is 15 gigabytes, but there is a way to get more storage. My current plan allows me 100 gigabytes and it's $20 a year. So just something for you to think about. Not necessarily advocating this platform over any others, but this is the primary cloud drive I use. And as you can see, even with, it doesn't show how much is backed up on here, but I have huge numbers of files, like entire videos, entire books, Audacity projects, Vellum files, just like straight uploaded. And you can see how much space I have left, even with many, many gigs of files. So that's one example. This is the slightly more practical piece that I'm sharing with you. The other examples that I have are Dropbox, iCloud, BookFunnel, and Amazon Web Services. I include BookFunnel because when you upload your files, like your ebook files, your PDFs on BookFunnel in order to give that link to other people, or similarly on apps similar to BookFunnel, that is a copy of your book. So it only really works for this one purpose for published books, or documents like that. But that's still a copy that you could turn to and re-download for yourself if all else fails. That's why I included it. The Amazon Web Services one is a little out there. It's just full disclosure, it's something that I haven't used it, but it's something I'm in the middle of trying to figure out how to set up. Amazon Web Services has a way to store data long-term for low cost. So those among you who are more tech savvy and more interested in exploring secure and long-term and cheap backups, that might be another option. But definitely Google Drive, Dropbox, iCloud, services like that where you can store your data long-term. Before I move on, there is one point I want to cover here, and that is about AI scraping. So something that I have been really thinking about myself is, if I upload the data, what's the likelihood of it's getting stolen for some AI purpose? I would say that we've seen some of this discussion. I don't really want to get into it because that's not the topic, but the risk is there. And I would say that when you are choosing the places that you want to upload your backups to, keep in mind what you're uploading and where and what the risk might be. And if you think that you have certain kinds of data, maybe artwork or maybe even the books themselves, that you absolutely do not want to see scraped. Like it would be absolutely devastating in whatever sense, and you cannot afford for it to be scraped. So keep that in mind. Um, keep that in mind and figure out other alternative options. So maybe multiple hard drives kept in multiple places. Maybe you keep one hard drive full of your critical files in a safe deposit box at the bank. Just keep these concerns in mind when you choose where you're going to upload your files to, because the concerns are there, and it is something that you should think about when you decide what kinds of backups you're doing. Okay, moving on from that to my next topic. So something else that I advise that we think about when it comes to backups is the size. And I say this because data storage is not cheap. Definitely, the more storage you require, the more expensive it gets. If anyone uses iCloud recovery, purchases a subscription on iCloud and for their Apple devices, you kind of know that the more data you wanna keep for yourself on that, the higher the price rises, and it kind of goes really high really quickly. And similarly on other platforms. So that's why I say keep in mind the size of your backups. A older hard drives may be just like 100 gigabytes or 1 terabyte only. Even older ones are 100 gigabytes. The newer ones are like 1 terabyte, 2 terabytes, more depending on how much money you're spending on those hard drives. And also like where you're buying them from, the level of technology, and the level of associated services. But it does get expensive really quickly. So here are some things to consider. And this might make it a little bit better sounding than what I was just saying. So the first thing is that text is small. And in order to properly explain this, I kind of gave a screenshot of some of my major Scrivener documents. So if you're familiar with Scrivener, it's not just the straight text file, it's a few other fancy packaging items around it that allow it to kind of remain bundled together that you can open up through the Scrivener app. So my main project on Scrivener is this project called the Quest of Freedom. It contains the majority of documents from my series. So dozens of notes, drafts for 2 books that are 63 chapters each, a bunch of short stories, bonus scenes, an entire prequel book. It's a lot of files, like in the hundreds. And the total size is 21.2 megabytes as of today. And the upload time for that, if I changed a bunch of files and I needed to upload it to that cloud drive, probably a couple minutes. So it's a very easy backup to do. Similarly, when you're considering how you're going to back your files up. Okay, let me step back a little bit. So those kernel files that are in that folder, I could directly upload them to Google Drive, just sort of like drop and upload. It would be probably a few minutes to upload all of it. Similarly, PDFs and text files are also, like other kinds of text files, maybe other Word docs you have even, definitely any .text files. Those files are also very small. And that's kind of the way that those documents are meant to be formatted. They're small. But other files that we as authors have tend to be very large. So any images you have, your covers, your character art, social media, graphics, anything of that nature, any videos you have. So the videos that you might be making for your reels, for use on your website and in other places, your vellum projects. So I'm using the formatting tool that I use as an example, vellum. So the vellum project that I use to generate, to take text and turn it and package it appropriately and turn it into an EPUB and to a PDF, those projects, Audacity projects, because I do a little bit of my own audiobook narration, they as you go down that list, the bigger they get and the more space is required. At the top of the slide, we're talking kilobytes and megabytes. Towards the bottom, we're talking about gigabytes. And as depending on the kinds of files you have, you need to consider how much storage space you need. So I bought as I discussed on the earlier slide, 100 gigabyte subscription on Google. That works for me because I have quite a bit I upload and save, and not just in my author area, but in other parts of my life. I store a lot of data there, so it makes sense. Maybe you don't need that. Maybe you need less. Maybe you need more. Maybe the 2 gigabytes that Dropbox allows for free is all you really need to save all of your author documents. But maybe you have many text documents in the sense that it's now built up to many gigabytes with like many published books. So you need more space. So just kind of keep that in mind. This is part of disaster recovery to sort of balance capacity, and it leads into other areas of cybersecurity on balancing capacity. So I'm just adding it here because I think it's a valuable discussion to have, and you don't want to really be at that place where you're uploading something that's really important and you ran out of space. And because you ran out of space, you didn't upload everything you needed, and a disaster happened and you just didn't have everything. And so this whole conversation I had was just about the cloud. But again, going back to the beginning of the conversation on this slide, think about it when it comes to hard drives as well. Okay, and then moving on to one of the last pieces, backup schedules. It's difficult to do backups regularly. In the corporate world, this is something like an automation. There's a whole team of people who might be doing this, and it in more modern environments, it just kind of happens automatically, and there aren't even any failures of the backups. That doesn't really apply to us. As authors, we're often just one individual person, maybe with an assistant or two, and you are doing it all yourself. So you need to think about what help you have and what is a sustainable pace. What's something you can actually manage to do? So many companies, they like back up their entire critical infrastructure every single day, or sometimes like every hour. That's not really sustainable for us. It isn't even sustainable in the use of Scrivener. I mean, it's to do a complete backup with Scrivener, that requires closing out of the application and syncing it. I mean, it's not easy to remember to do that, even if it's possible. This is kind of why I came to the conclusion below that you should at least back up your works in progress every day. So using something like Scrivener or Word Docs or Google Docs or something like that. And then your other documents, like images, published files, consider something like every month or when edited, if you don't edit them all that often. The point is that you need to remember to do it. That's kind of the hardest part of backing things up, right? To remember to hit save, to remember to copy to another drive or to upload to the cloud. That's the hardest part. If for those who use Scrivener as much as I do, have you ever encountered that you had the document open and you forgot that it was open, and then you went to another device and you tried to open it there, and then you had a conflict file because you forgot to back up for the first piece of writing, and then you kept writing without remembering that you had already written some stuff, and then you were forced to scramble and reconcile. It's difficult to remember that you're supposed to do it. So this is why I have two recommendations here. The first is to create a spreadsheet with your cadences for each of your critical items as determined in your business impact analysis. Obviously, for something like your daily WIP backups, that's just kind of a habit that you just need to build, maybe. But you could also make calendar invites, or reminders that tell you that, okay, at this time, make sure everything's backed up, make sure everything's good. But for other things, a cadence, written cadences, written timelines of when you're going to back things up, that can be very helpful. Something I do on top of that is I create a reminder or a calendar invite to every so often refresh certain files, so that it's something that I tend not to forget. Now, of course, you can always like, snooze your reminders, but hopefully if the reminder is coming, you may actually do it. It is more difficult as an individual to remember to do your backups. Remember, the corporate world, they have whole teams for this. They have automation. We don't have any of that. But the idea is, it does kind of go back to a kind of habit forming, that if you have it written down, if you have reminders and calendar events, you will remember to do it at the pace that you have determined necessary, so that when a disaster arrives, you aren't sort of left without your documents. This is my kind of bonus tip area, and that's disaster recovery scenarios. So in my work as an auditor, I advise my clients to at least every year have a sort of at least at the minimum, a written exercise where they walk through um, a disaster happened and what they're going to do to recover from it, and then also do a more of a technological related test of failing over their systems from the original to the secondary. For us, I would say that if you're doing all of this, you've done everything, and you're like, I really care about this area. So what should I do to ensure that I'm as fully prepared as possible? So this is where I would tell you to consider engaging in disaster recovery scenarios. Actually think through the things that we as authors don't want to consider. That spilled water on my laptop, as mentioned before, lost my hard drive, the cloud account that I was using all of a sudden put up additional paywalls and I can't continue uploading. Someone hacked my account and I lost all of my data. Or bigger disasters, the cloud services provider had a disaster of their own and your data was impacted and you lost it. What could you do to prepare yourself in those scenarios? They're very scary ideas, I think, when you're thinking about your books getting lost, your writing getting lost. But preparation offers additional power. And thinking through what you would do in that scenario is often very helpful in keeping you calm and not panicking when a disaster, even if it's not the one that you necessarily prepared for, when that arrives. So the simplest of something like, okay, my laptop died. Well, personally, I know that my my vellum files were uploaded at the last time of edit. The Audacity files, not updated as recently, but they were updated, so I would be fine on those. My Scrivener files were updated, I think, like a couple of hours ago, and I do have a separate copy on a different cloud system. So, okay, I would be fine if this laptop, may all that is good forbid, but if something happened to it, I would be good. It's important to have that kind of preparation so that disasters don't catch us off guard. And I would also say, and this is something that I think I personally also should do more of. I tell my clients this, I'm telling myself this, I would also tell you this. Make sure you write it down. Make sure you write down your steps. It's another way of keeping the anxiety that accompanies the ideas of disasters from being too powerful, because you have written what you need to do. And on top of that, if you're going through these disaster recovery scenarios and you're like, that doesn't work. If a disaster struck right now, I last backed up my files and took care of these things like 2 months ago, and I would be like losing 2 months of data. That's just not acceptable. So then you know that you need to increase your cadence so that it's a little bit more frequent than that. Or maybe you might find that the pace that you've set is not sustainable. So then or it's just not necessary. It's not one of those uses of time and energy and technology that you really need to put in. So that you could dial things back, and you may uncover additional lessons, tips, tricks as you think through scenarios. But that is my bonus tip, considering that it's already plenty to do to think through a business impact analysis and plenty to do to set up a disaster recovery plan in the way that I described and implement it. But if you can do this, it would also be pretty good for you and your author business. There's plenty else to discuss in cybersecurity that I haven't discussed. Hopefully I have some other chance to discuss those things, but here's just a kind of a quick list that I thought of additional topics. Some other things that as authors we might want to think about. And if you want to kind of look up these topics on your own, feel free to. Finally, coming to questions.
Do we think the 7 external drives I have sitting on my desk right now are sufficient? Is that a decent number? I was counting while you were talking, and I'm like, that's a normal number, right?
Well, it's definitely a number that it's a good number. Someone could say it's excessive. I'm not going to say that, considering I spent an entire presentation thinking about being prepared. I would say though that why are they all on your desk?
So 2 of them aren't mine. I'm in the process of recovering them from someone else. One of them is from 2012.
Mm-hmm.
So it's mostly there for nostalgia. One was inside my computer. One has my portable copy of Windows on it. One's a
Well,
20 terabyte external drive. It just lives there.
well, the reason I'm asking is that if the drives that you're using are all on your desk, if something happens in the vicinity of your desk,
Oh yeah.
you know,
If
you
something happens to my desk, I'm in
yeah,
multiple worlds of hurt.
yes.
Uh,
It's
I
why
just started counting while you were talking and was laughing.
yeah, it's why my external drive actually is sitting in my closet. It's still not really the best place, but it is one of the I mean, it's definitely more secure than other places in my room in my house. Um, there is another drive that I have sitting somewhere else, but that's not currently in use. And I'm kind of thinking I've been thinking for a while that I might also like see about that, clean it up maybe, and also start using that, and that I'll keep somewhere else. But definitely that's why like I have my external drive and I have some stuff on one cloud vendor stuff, and then the same stuff on another cloud vendor, and then a few other things on a third. So that's my own personal situation.
Yeah, I've got 2 or 3 sets of cloud backups. I apparently at some after multiple of those fun permanent drive failures and things like that in the past, I started hoarding data recovery options. But,
Yes.
all right, I'll have them cut the fun middle bit of this. Thank you everyone for listening and your attention. Please ask questions in chat and enjoy Right Hack 2025.
Thank you. And also use blue light glasses if you're in front of your laptop for too long. My
Super use blue light glasses. Highly
yeah.
recommend.
And for anyone who's interested, here's my contact information. You can kind of take a screenshot, email, website, Instagram. And then I've been ending my presentations these days with this quote that from the Lord of the Rings, because I'm a major Tolkien fan, that in this sense, I suppose you can think of it as we have time to prepare for a disaster. We have to decide what to do with the time that is given to us, but applied in all the ways you think are best for you. And thank you for listening. I hope this was educational and valuable, and please ask questions.